I need to preface this by saying that I am not someone who believes in ghosts. Or at least, I wasn't. I grew up in a pretty logical household. My dad was an engineer, my mom was a nurse. Everything in my world had an explanation, a reason, a source. So when I tell you what happened to me during my freshman year at Harrowing University, a small liberal arts school in upstate New York, I want you to understand that I spent months trying to explain it away. I never could. It started the first week of September. I had arrived on campus early because I was playing on the soccer team, and preseason training started 2 weeks before regular students moved in. The campus was quiet, almost unsettlingly so. The dining hall wasn't fully open yet. Most of the dorms were empty. It was just athletes, a few early arriving RAs, and the skeleton crew of staff who kept the place running. They put us on the 3rd floor of Aldrich Hall, one of the oldest buildings on campus, built in 1923. That detail matters. Remember it. My room was 312. My roommate, a kid named Derek from Ohio, seemed normal enough. Kept to himself, played video games, fine. But the room directly below us, room 214, that's where things started. The first night I noticed it, I thought I was just exhausted from practice. I was lying in bed around midnight and I heard it. A knocking. Not a banging, not pipes rattling, a deliberate, rhythmic knocking. 3 knocks, a pause. 3 knocks, a pause. Over and over. I assumed it was someone in the room below us moving furniture or messing around. I put my pillow over my head and eventually fell asleep. The second night, same thing. 3 knocks, pause. 3 knocks, pause. This time, I sat up and actually listened. And the more I listened, the more I realized something strange. The sound wasn't coming from the floor. It was coming from inside the wall. I told Derek about it the next morning. He shrugged, said old buildings make weird sounds, and went back to his cereal. I let it go. But then on the 4th night, something changed. The knocking started as usual around midnight. I was already half awake, almost expecting it at that point. 3 knocks, pause. 3 knocks, pause. And then it stopped. And in the silence that followed, I heard something else. Breathing. Slow, shallow breathing, coming from the corner of the room near the closet. I told myself it was Derek. I looked over at his bed. He was asleep, on the opposite side of the room. I did not sleep that night. I started asking around about the building, casually, I didn't want people thinking I was losing my mind. I asked one of the older athletes, a senior named Marcus, if he'd ever heard anything weird about Aldrich Hall. He got very quiet. Then he said, "You're in the old wing, right? 3rd floor?" I said yes. He nodded slowly and said, "Don't ask the RAs about room 114. Room 114. That was on the 1st floor, directly below Derek's and my room. 2 floors down, but still within the same vertical column of the building. I asked Marcus why. He just shook his head and said, "They sealed it. They don't talk about why." That weekend, regular students moved in and campus filled up. The noise and energy of the new semester should have drowned out everything. And during the day, it did. But at night, the knocking came back. Every single night. 3 knocks, a pause. 3 knocks. I started keeping a log. I don't know why, maybe because writing it down made it feel more manageable, more logical, something I could study rather than fear. September 8th. Knocking starts at 12:17 a.m., stops at 12:43 a.m. September 9th. Knocking starts at 12:14 a.m., stops at 12:51 a.m. September 10th. Knocking starts at 12:19 a.m. And then, on September 10th, it didn't stop. It knocked all the way until 4 a.m., without pause, without variation. 3 knocks, 3 knocks, 3 knocks. By the time it finally stopped, I was sitting upright in bed with every light in the room on, and Derek, who had finally started hearing it too, was sitting at his desk staring at the wall with wide eyes. He looked at me and said quietly, "Dude, what is that?" I said, "I don't know." And then, in the complete silence that followed, something slid under our door. It was a piece of paper, yellowed, old-looking. I picked it up with shaking hands. It was a handwritten note. The handwriting was careful, almost childlike, in pencil. And it said, "Please stop knocking. I'm trying to sleep." Derek and I stared at each other. Then we both looked at the door. The hallway outside was completely silent. We opened the door. There was no one there, just the long, empty, fluorescent-lit corridor of Aldrich Hall at 4 in the morning. We never figured out who slid that note under our door. But here's the thing that kept me awake for the rest of that semester. The thing I keep coming back to even now, years later. We were on the 3rd floor. We were the ones hearing the knocking from below. But that note said, "Please stop knocking," as if whoever wrote it was the one hearing us. I did eventually find out about room 114. A librarian, an older woman who'd worked at Harwick for over 30 years, told me, after I pressed her, that in 1987, a freshman student had been found dead in that room, alone. Cause of death was listed as cardiac arrest, which was unusual for a 19-year-old. But the part that the university never publicized, the part she told me in a low voice while looking over her shoulder, was that when they found the boy, his knuckles were completely raw, like he'd been knocking on something for a very, very long time. They sealed the room the following year. They've never opened it since. I think about that boy sometimes. I think about what he was knocking on. I think about what or who he was trying to reach. And sometimes, when it's very late and very quiet, I think maybe he found them. That first story still gives me chills every time I tell it. And I want to remind you, these are real accounts, real people, real places, which makes the next one even harder to tell. Because this one isn't about something that goes bump in the night. This one is about a person. And sometimes, people are the scariest thing of all. His name was Professor Gerald Bell, and everyone loved him. That's important to establish first, because it's the reason everything else was allowed to happen. Professor Bell taught developmental psychology at a mid-sized state university in the Midwest. I won't name the school, not because I want to protect anyone there, but because there are people still there who didn't deserve what happened, and they've been through enough. I was a sophomore when I took his class, 20 years old, psych minor. He was probably in his mid-50s, silver-haired, tall, the kind of man who wore blazers with elbow patches without a trace of self-consciousness. He had this way of making you feel like you were the most interesting person he'd ever spoken to. Like whatever you said in class deserved to be taken seriously and turned over and examined. Students loved him. Other faculty respected him. He'd been at the university for over 2 decades. He'd won teaching awards. Of course he had. The semester started normally. The class was 3 times a week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, at 10 a.m. About 30 students. Lecture format with a seminar discussion at the end of each class. Professor Bell had a habit of staying after class, always available, always willing to talk through concepts or give extra resources or discuss your paper topic. Students waited in line for him sometimes. I noticed him noticing me about 3 weeks in. It was subtle at first, the way a professor's gaze finds yours during a lecture when they want confirmation from someone that what they're saying is landing. And I was engaged. I was genuinely interested in the material, so it seemed natural. Then he started calling on me more. Still fine, still explainable. Then after class one Friday, he asked me to stay behind. Said he thought my perspective in the discussion was particularly interesting, and would I be willing to talk a bit more about my paper topic. I stayed. We talked for maybe 20 minutes. He was charming and smart and asked all the right questions. I left feeling good, flattered even. I didn't mention it to anyone. The following week, he asked me to stay after again, and the week after that. Each conversation was a little longer. He started offering specific books from his personal library that I had to read for my paper. He started saying things like, "I don't usually share this with students, but I think you can handle it." He gave me his personal cell number in case I had questions outside of office hours. I remember feeling uneasy for the first time when he gave me that number. A small, cold feeling in my stomach that I immediately talked myself out of. He's a professor. He's being helpful. You're overthinking it. This is the part of the story where I want to stop and say something directly. When you are 20 years old and a person of authority singles you out and makes you feel special, genuinely special, not in a way that feels gross or obvious, but in a way that feels like being seen, it is incredibly hard to trust the small, cold feeling. Because that feeling goes against everything the situation looks like. And he was very, very good at making it look like nothing. Things escalated slowly. That's the design. He began suggesting we have our discussions over coffee, off campus, just as a more comfortable setting, he said, just so we could talk more freely without the formality of the classroom. I went once. He asked me a lot of personal questions about my family, about my relationships, about what I wanted out of life. He framed it as relevant to developmental psychology. He was studying the way young people form identity, he said. I answered. Looking back, I want to grab myself by the shoulders, but I didn't know yet. Then he gave me extra credit. That's what he called it, extra credit. He said there was a personal research project he was working on, separate from his university work, and that he needed a research assistant. It would be paid, it would look excellent on grad school applications, and it would be kept between us because the university's bureaucracy was slow and he didn't want to deal with the approval process. That last part, it would be kept between us. I said I needed to think about it. He smiled and said, "Of course, take your time." And then he said, very gently, "I just want you to know that I see something in you that most people don't see. I'd hate for you to miss an opportunity because of hesitation." I went home and I sat with that feeling again, that cold, small feeling. Now it was taking up more space, and this time I made a different choice. I talked to my roommate that night. I told her everything. The staying after class, the coffee meetings, the personal questions, the personal cell number, and now this. She listened to all of it. And then she said something I'll never forget. She said, "Name one other student he does this with." I opened my mouth, and I couldn't. In 2 months of watching him interact with 30 students, I could not name one other person he had singled out this way. Not one other student he'd asked to stay after. Not one other person he'd taken for coffee. Just me. Just me. I went to the university's Title IX office the next day, and this is where the story gets both better and worse at the same time. Better because they believed me, immediately. No pushback, no, "Are you sure you didn't misread it?" They believed me, and they opened an investigation. Worse because of what the investigation found. I was not the first. There were 3 other students, 2 women and 1 man, who had reported similar behavior from Professor Bell over the past 6 years. In each case, the university had handled it internally. In each case, Bell had been given a verbal warning, made to attend some training, and sent back to his classroom. The paid off-campus research position was a pattern. His first victim, I'm going to call her that because that's what she was, had been a 19-year-old sophomore 11 years before I walked into his classroom. 11 years. He had been doing this for 11 years, and the university had known, and they had let it continue. I want to end this story by telling you that Professor Bell was fired, prosecuted, and that every institution that failed those students was held accountable. But this isn't a movie. Bell was placed on administrative leave while the investigation was ongoing. He retired. He retired with his full pension at the end of that semester. The university issued a statement about updating their policies. The last I heard, Gerald Bell was living very comfortably in a suburb of the city. He still has his teaching awards on his wall, probably. The reason I'm telling this story isn't because of anything supernatural. There are no ghosts here. There's no monster hiding in the shadows. The monster was at the front of the classroom. He had silver hair and elbow patches and a warm smile. And the most terrifying thing about him wasn't what he was. It was how long he was allowed to be it. Take a breath. I know that one hits differently than the first. But I told you, not all the horrors in college come from the supernatural. Some of them are very, very human. But the next story? The next story brings us back to something we can't quite explain. Because sometimes the most terrifying discoveries aren't the ones you search for. Sometimes they find you. My junior year, I moved into an off-campus house with 4 friends. It was one of those old Victorian-style houses that you find in college towns everywhere. 3 stories, drafty windows, creaking floors, radiators that hissed and clanked through the whole winter like something alive was trapped inside them. The landlord was a semi-absent man named Frank, who responded to maintenance requests about 30% of the time and seemed to view the property as a passive income machine he'd stopped caring about sometime around 2004. The rent was cheap. That's the thing about houses like that. The rent is always cheap. My 4 housemates, Jordan, a pre-med student who kept human anatomy charts on every wall of his room. Becca, an art major who painted large abstract canvases and took up more physical space in a house than any person I'd ever met. Tommy, who was basically a ghost himself. You'd know he lived there from the dishes in the sink and the occasional sound of his gaming headset through his door, but you'd go 3 days without actually seeing him. And Kira. Kira is important to the story. The house had a basement. Most houses like that do. It wasn't finished. Bare concrete floor, stone foundation walls, single bare bulb on a pull chain, old wooden shelving units along one wall holding paint cans, gardening tools, and boxes of junk left by previous tenants. The washer and dryer were down there. That was the basement's only practical function in our lives. It was the kind of basement that nobody ever willingly spent more time in than they had to. Kira spent time in it. Not because she wanted to, because she was the one who did laundry most regularly, or at least most responsibly, and she noticed things that the rest of us, dashing in and out, didn't. She noticed, in the second week of October, that the stone wall on the far end of the basement didn't sound the same as the other walls. She discovered this by accidentally dropping a full laundry detergent bottle, which bounced and hit the far wall with a hollow thunk. She hit the other walls. Solid. Dense. The sound of a fist against packed stone. She hit the far wall again. Hollow. She came upstairs and told me and Jordan about it over dinner. She wasn't scared. Kira was not easily scared. She was more curious. Maybe even excited, the way an engineer gets excited about a puzzle. Jordan said it was probably just an old cistern or a root cellar. Common in Victorian-era houses, he said. Completely normal. I said nothing because something about the phrase hollow wall in the basement sat in my stomach the wrong way. But we went down together after dinner to investigate. Kira was right. The far wall, it was maybe 8 feet wide and went from floor to ceiling, was definitively hollow when you knocked on it. And now that we were looking at it properly, we could see something we hadn't noticed before. The wall wasn't original. The stone foundation walls of the rest of the basement were old, ancient-looking, dark with age, the mortar crumbling slightly at the edges. But the far wall stones were different. Slightly lighter in color, slightly cleaner mortar. Still old, but not as old as everything else. Someone had built that wall in front of the original foundation wall. Someone had sealed something off. Jordan, who I believe was missing the part of his brain that processes self-preservation, suggested we open it. I suggested we call Frank the landlord first. We called Frank. Frank did not answer. We texted Frank. Frank responded 4 hours later with the words, "Old house stuff, don't worry about it." So naturally, the following Saturday, Jordan and Tommy spent the afternoon with a hammer and a chisel working on the mortar around the stones of the far wall. I didn't help. I watched from the bottom of the stairs. It took about 3 hours to loosen enough stones to pull one free, then another. Then a section of wall about 4 feet wide and 5 feet tall came away in pieces. And behind it was a room. A small room, maybe 10 feet by 8 feet. The walls were the original stone foundation. The floor was dirt, packed hard like it had been walked on for many years before being sealed. There was no light source, obviously, so they were using flashlights. And in that room, there were things. The first thing was furniture. A small wooden cot frame, no mattress, pushed against one wall, and a wooden chair, both very old. The second thing was on the walls. Scratches. Floor-to-ceiling scratches in the stone. Not random. Not the kind of scratches you'd get from someone brushing a tool against a wall. These were deliberate, grouped in fours with a diagonal line through them. Tally marks. Hundreds of them, maybe more. Jordan, who I will point out studies the human body for a living, began to count them. I stood at the hole in the wall and watched him count. He got to somewhere around 400 before he stopped. His face had changed. He shone his flashlight slowly around the room and then at the floor, and then he straightened up and turned around. He said, "Hey, come look at this." I said, "Absolutely not." He said, "Seriously, come look." I went through the opening. He pointed the flashlight at the back of the door, the interior side of the newly broken open wall where the stones they'd removed had been. On the largest stone, scratched deep and careful into the surface, were words. "Please don't leave me in here." Now, I want to be very careful about the next part because This is where the story stopped having a clean explanation. We called the police. Of course we did. The tally marks, the cot, the plea scratched into the stone, all of it pointed to something that needed to be reported. The police came. They examined the room. They concluded, and they said this with what I can only describe as studied disinterest, that the room was historically significant but not an active crime scene. The construction of the concealing wall was estimated to be approximately 80 to 90 years old based on the materials. Whatever had happened in that room had happened long before any of us were alive. A historian from the local historical society came out 2 days later. She was far more interested than the police had been. She took photographs and measurements and samples of the mortar and told us that the house had been built in 1891 and had, at various periods, been a boarding house, a private sanatorium, and a private residence. The period during which it served as a private sanatorium was from 1922 to 1931. The wall, she estimated, was built around 1930. We never found out who had been in that room. The historical record of the sanatorium was incomplete. Patient records, if they'd ever been kept, were long gone. The tally marks could represent days or weeks, given the count potentially more than a year. Someone had been kept in that small, dirt-floored room for what appeared to be well over a year, and before the wall was closed around them, they had pressed a stone into the surface of the wall they were about to lose sight of forever, and they had scratched 7 words into it. Please don't leave me in here. Here's the part I haven't told you yet. The part that makes me genuinely unsettled, even now. I lived in that house for the remaining 8 months of the school year. Jordan, after 2 weeks of being really excited about the discovery, went back to his anatomy charts. Tommy continued to be a ghost. Frank, the landlord, sent someone to put a plywood board over the opening, and that was that. But Kira started having nightmares in November. She'd wake up in the middle of the night and not be able to tell me quite what they were about, just darkness and a voice, she said. A voice asking something over and over, but she could never make out the words when she woke up. She lost weight. She started sleeping with all her lights on. She wouldn't go into the basement anymore, not even to do laundry. In December, 2 weeks before winter break, I came home at midnight to find Kira sitting cross-legged on the kitchen floor, staring at the basement door. I said her name. She turned around and she looked at me with the most exhausted eyes I'd ever seen on a human face. And she said, "She's still asking. She just wants someone to answer her." Kira transferred schools after winter break. She told me later it was for academic reasons. Maybe it was. I didn't push. I still think about that room, about whoever made those tally marks, about whether someone desperate enough to scratch 7 words into a stone before being sealed away might still be trying to deliver the message. 3 stories in, I hope you're still doing okay. Because I need to tell you, the next 2 stories are the ones that disturbed me the most when I first heard them. The 4th one is about obsession, about how a mind can turn inward and build something inside itself that becomes more real than the world outside. And about how, when you live in close quarters with someone whose mind is doing that, you might not notice until it's almost too late. I had 3 roommates in college. Freshman year, I had a great one, a girl named Priya, who became one of my closest friends and who I still talk to every week. Sophomore year, I was in a single. Bliss. Junior year, I was matched through the university housing system with a girl I'll call Mara. Mara was quiet. That was the first thing I noticed. Not shy quiet. Not the uncomfortable silence of someone who wants to talk but doesn't know how. Deliberate quiet. The kind of quiet that a person wears like an outfit, like they've made a conscious decision to take up as little acoustic space in the world as possible. She was a junior like me, studying literature. She had an enormous number of books, organized in a system I never fully understood but that clearly made complete sense to her. She kept the room tidy. She never had guests over. She went to her classes, went to the library, came back, read, went to sleep. For the first month, I thought I'd won the roommate lottery. Quiet, clean, considerate. In the second month, I started to notice the conversations. Mara talked on her phone sometimes. This is normal. This is a college student. This is fine. But I started noticing that her phone conversations had a particular quality. She talked a lot. More than I'd ever heard her talk to me or, honestly, to anyone. And what she talked about was her day, her classes, what she'd read, what she was thinking about. The intimate, mundane details of a person's inner life. But here's the thing. She never said the other person's name. In weeks of overhearing the edges of these conversations, I never heard her address whoever was on the other end by name. She just talked and presumably listened. But I never heard her say a name. I told myself I was being weird. People don't always use names on the phone. I went back to my own life. In the third month, something shifted. I came back to the room one afternoon, came back unexpectedly. I had a class get canceled, and Mara was in the middle of one of her conversations. She was sitting on her bed, legs crossed, phone pressed to her ear, talking with more animation than I'd ever seen from her. She looked almost happy. There was color in her face. She saw me come in and immediately went quiet. She said into the phone, "I have to go." She put the phone face down on the bed, and she looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen on her before. Protective, almost guilty, like I'd walked in on something private. I apologized for interrupting and started putting my things down, and after a moment she said very quietly, "It's fine." But it wasn't, somehow. The energy in the room had changed. She was different for the rest of the evening, contained again, back in her quiet shell, but with something underneath it now that felt like tension. I'm going to jump forward slightly because what I'm about to tell you requires some context that I only got later. About 6 weeks into that weirdness, so we were maybe 3.5 months into the semester, I ran into Mara's academic advisor at a campus event. I knew who she was because Mara had mentioned her a few times. We started talking, and eventually I mentioned that I lived with Mara, and the advisor's face did something complicated. She said carefully, "How is she doing? How does she seem to you?" I said she seemed fine. Quiet, but fine. The advisor nodded. Then she said, "If you ever notice anything concerning, anything at all, please come to me, or call student health, okay?" I said, "Okay." I did not know what to do with that information, so I mostly buried it. The breaking point came on a Wednesday night in November. I woke up at about 2 a.m. to the sound of Mara's voice. She was sitting at her desk in the dark, only the glow of her phone screen lighting her face, and she was talking. The phone wasn't to her ear, it was face up on the desk. She was talking to the phone like it was a person sitting across from her, gesturing, nodding, pausing in the way that you pause when someone else is speaking. But I could see the screen from my bed. It was black. No call, no app, nothing running. She was talking to a dark screen. I lay completely still and listened. She was talking about a book she was reading, stopping to, I assume, let the other person respond, then answering something. She laughed softly at one point, a real laugh, the laugh of someone genuinely delighted by something someone else said. Then she said, quietly and warmly, I know you don't like it when I sleep, but I have to. A pause. Because I'm tired. That's why. A longer pause. I'll talk to you in the morning. I promise. She turned her phone over, laid down, and within minutes was asleep. I went to Mara's advisor the next morning. I felt like a traitor. I want to acknowledge that. Going to an authority figure about a roommate feels like a violation of the unspoken code of shared living. But I kept hearing her laugh at something I couldn't hear, and I kept seeing that dark phone screen, and I couldn't sit on it anymore. The advisor was not surprised. That was the thing that got me. She was not surprised. She told me, carefully, in vague terms, that Mara had a history of something she called maladaptive social coping. She said Mara had struggled with severe social anxiety and isolation since early childhood, and had developed ways of managing that isolation that she wasn't going to detail to me, but that student health was aware of. She said, Has she mentioned anyone named Elliot to you? I said no. She closed her eyes briefly, then opened them. She said, Elliot is not a real person. He's someone that Mara has created. Someone she talks to when she feels isolated. She's been in therapy for it since high school. She was doing very well for a while. I sat with that for a long time. Mara had an imaginary friend. A fully developed, apparently conversational imaginary friend named Elliot, who she'd had likely for years, who had gotten her through her loneliness, and who had apparently become more present again since she'd moved into the dorms. Now, I want to be careful about how I frame this, because I'm not trying to demonize Mara or make her sound frightening because of her mental health. What she had was a coping mechanism that had grown beyond what was healthy, and she needed help, and I hope she got it. But here's the part of this story that I genuinely cannot explain away. About 2 weeks after I spoke to the advisor, so Mara was now seeing a therapist regularly. Things were calmer in the room. She seemed a bit more grounded. I was cleaning up my side of the room, and I moved a stack of books that had accumulated near my bed. Under the books, there was a piece of paper. I didn't recognize it. I didn't put it there. It was a piece of notebook paper, folded once. My name was written on the outside. Not Mara's handwriting. I knew Mara's handwriting from the notes she left on our shared whiteboard. This was different, smaller, neater. Inside, it said, She talks about you. She likes you more than she lets on. Be patient with her. I showed it to no one. I still have it. I have never asked Mara about it. I'm not sure I want the answer. Because the answer is either that Mara wrote it herself in a dissociated state and has no memory of it, which is deeply sad, or something about the situation is stranger than anyone's clinical vocabulary has room for. And I genuinely do not know which possibility frightens me more. We're at the final story, and I want to take a second before I tell it. The first 4 stories have been about things that crept up slowly, things that built and took time to reveal themselves. This last one is different. This one was violent in its speed. It arrived all at once, like a door being kicked open in the middle of the night. I debated including it. I'm including it because the person who experienced it asked me to tell it. They said, if one person reads the signs sooner than I did, it's worth it. This is for them. Whitmore Hall was the newest dorm on campus. 8 stories, modern construction, card key access at every entrance, security cameras in the lobby and stairwells. The kind of building that looks, on a tour, like the university takes your safety seriously. I moved into Whitmore at the start of my senior year. I was in a single on the 7th floor. I had chosen it specifically for the single. After 3 years of roommates, I desperately wanted to be alone. The irony of that is not lost on me now. The 8th floor, the floor above mine, was unique. Unlike the other floors, which were standard double and single dorm rooms, the 8th floor was a converted common space. It had been originally designed as a study lounge, but had been repurposed as a cluster of graduate student apartments. Small studios, about 8 of them, arranged along a single corridor. I had no particular reason to ever go to the 8th floor. There was a study lounge on my own floor. Everything I needed was on 7. The 8th floor becomes relevant because of what started in October. The noises began mid-October. Now, I want to be careful here because this is a dormitory, and dormitories are noisy, and the noise of 8 floors of college students doing college student things is not a cause for alarm. But the noises I'm talking about were not that. They were specifically from the room directly above mine. Footsteps, but not the casual, going somewhere specific footsteps of normal life. These were pacing footsteps, back and forth, in a pattern that I began to recognize. 7 steps in one direction, a pause, 7 steps back. Over and over, sometimes for 20 minutes, sometimes for 3 hours. I started timing it. The pacing happened most often between midnight and 4 a.m. I didn't go to the RA about it immediately because, and I'm being honest, I told myself I was overreacting. Old building noises, although it wasn't old. Thin floors, although they were modern construction. Someone who was just a night owl and paced when they were stressed. I had been a college student for 3 years. I had heard weird dorm noises for 3 years. I told myself this was just another one. But then, in early November, something changed. I came back to my room late one night, maybe 11 p.m., and there was something outside my door. A piece of paper, folded, sitting on the floor with my room number written on it. Inside, a photo. A printed photo of me walking across campus, taken from a distance with what must have been a zoomed lens. I was carrying my backpack and looking down at my phone, and I hadn't known anyone was there. No message, no name, nothing. Just the photo. I held that photo for a long time. And then I did something that I now know was right and that I now know I did not do fast enough. I took it to the campus security office the next morning. The officer I spoke to was a middle-aged man named Dave who had the energy of someone who had heard many things and found most of them to be resolvable situations. He looked at the photo. He filled out a form. He said they would look into it and advised me to let them know if anything else occurred. I asked if I should be worried. He said, "We'll look into it." 3 days later, a second photo was outside my door. This one was of me in the library, at my regular table. I had a specific table I always sat at. I was reading, again taken from a distance. I took it to security. Dave logged it. The investigation was ongoing. I went to the RA on my floor. I told her everything, the photos, the pacing above me, all of it. She was young, maybe 23, and she took it seriously in the way that people take things seriously when they know they're a little out of their depth. She escalated it to the head of residential life, who escalated it to campus security. I was told they were looking into who resided in the room directly above mine. I was not told anything further. The third photo arrived on a Friday night while I was home. But this one was different. This one was of me inside my room, through my window. My room was on the 7th floor. My window faced the interior courtyard of the building, and someone had photographed me through my 7th floor window from somewhere that gave them a clear line of sight. I called campus security immediately. Not the office, the emergency line. 2 officers arrived within 5 minutes. What happened in the next 48 hours, I'm going to try to tell you as accurately as I can. Campus security, now taking this at a significantly more elevated level, identified the occupant of the room directly above mine, apartment 8C. His name was a name that meant nothing to me. I had never, to my knowledge, seen him or spoken to him. He was a graduate student, 26 years old, in the engineering department. When they attempted to speak with him, he was not in his room. They requested access from the resident director and conducted a welfare check. The room was not empty. It contained, on one entire wall, photographs of me. Over 100 photographs printed and pinned up in a careful, organized grid, going back, based on the clothing I was wearing in them, to August, 2 months before I'd even moved into the building. There were also printed copies of my class schedule, my academic transcript somehow, printouts of my social media posts, notes, handwritten about my routine. When I woke up, when I went to the dining hall, which route I walked to which buildings. In the 2 months I had been sleeping 7 floors below him, he had built a file on me that was more comprehensive than what most people know about themselves. He was located 2 days later. He had left campus. He was arrested. At his arraignment, his attorney argued that he was experiencing a mental health crisis, which may have been true. I hold no simple feelings about what was happening in his mind, but I hold very clear feelings about the 8 weeks during which the pacing above me was something I explained away. Because here is what I know now that I didn't know then. The way a predatory fixation works is not dramatic. It does not announce itself. It does not look like what you see in the movies where the threat is obvious and immediate. It looks like pacing footsteps at 3 a.m. that you write off as a stressed student. It looks like a photo that is disturbing but explainable somehow if you try hard enough. It looks like a dozen small things that only become a clear picture when you put them together. And by the time the picture is clear, you have been in the frame for months. I finished the school year in a different dorm. I graduated in May. I have never returned to that campus. And I tell this story not to frighten you, or not only to frighten you, but because the person who lived it said something to me that has stayed lodged in my chest ever since. She said, "The moment something feels wrong, not scary, not dangerous, just wrong, you do not owe anyone the benefit of the doubt. Not your comfort, not your hesitation, not your politeness. Trust the feeling. Trust it fast." 5 stories. 5 people who walked into college expecting late nights full of laughter, then came out the other side carrying something they hadn't packed. A room that remembers what happened to the boy who couldn't leave it. A professor who hid monstrous things behind a warm smile and a teaching award. A sealed room in a basement that held someone's last desperate words. A girl who made a friend in the dark, and the note that appeared from nowhere. And a wall of photographs that turned a student's ordinary life into something she still can't look directly at. I believe all of these people. I believe that the world has more darkness in it than we're comfortable admitting. That institutions meant to protect us sometimes protect themselves instead. That old buildings hold old things that don't always stay in the past. That a mind in pain can create something that might not stay entirely inside that mind. And that the most reliable horror of all is the one wearing a human face. If you're in college right now, if you're sitting in a dorm room somewhere watching this at midnight, lock your door, trust your instincts, and if something feels wrong, even in a way you can't name yet, it's okay to name it anyway. Stay safe out there, and I'll see you in the next one.